My name is Mira, and for a long time, I believed silence was my safest place. Not because I was weak, but because I was tired. Tired of explaining myself. Tired of fixing mistakes that weren't mine. Tired of loving someone who slowly stopped seeing me as a human being. Before I continue, let me pause for a moment. If you love real-life stories that feel raw, emotional, and true, please subscribe to this channel, Stories with Sister Mira. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I read your messages, and they remind me I'm not alone. Now, let me take you back to the day everything changed. The mediation room at the family court felt colder than it should have. The air conditioner was too strong, or maybe it was the tension freezing the air. Across the long wooden table sat my husband, soon to be my ex-husband, Ryan Hale. Ryan looked relaxed, confident, almost proud. He leaned back in his chair, one arm resting casually on the armrest, his expensive watch shining under the fluorescent lights. His face held that same arrogant smile I had learned to recognize over the years, the smile that said he believed he had already won. Across from him sat me. I wore a simple dress, no jewelry worth mentioning. My hands were folded neatly in my lap. I didn't cry, I didn't argue, I didn't even sigh. My calm irritated him more than any screaming ever could. The lawyer slid a thick stack of divorce papers toward me. The sound of paper scraping against the table felt louder than it should have. Ryan smirked and cleared his throat. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life," he said loudly, making sure everyone in the room could hear. "You won't survive without me." He laughed, shaking his head as if I were a foolish child. "You lived comfortably because of me, because of my hard work. You were just a housewife spending my money. You have no real skills, no future in a city like this without my name." Each word felt like a slap, but I didn't flinch. I let him speak. I wanted to remember this moment clearly. I wanted to remember who he had become. I remembered the man who once stood nervously in front of my parents, promising he would protect me. The man who said we were equals. That man was gone. When Ryan finally finished, he pushed an expensive pen across the table toward me. "Go ahead," he said. "Sign it. Be brave. But don't come crawling back when you realize how hard life really is." The document was exactly what he wanted. No asset division, no property claims. A clean, unconditional divorce. To him, it was a victory. To me, it was the final piece of a plan I had been preparing quietly for years. I picked up the pen and signed my name without hesitation. My hand didn't shake. The ink dried quickly, sealing the end of a 5-year marriage. Ryan grabbed the papers immediately, checked my signature, and laughed out loud. He was free. Free to marry his mistress. Free to enjoy what he believed was his wealth. Free to celebrate. I stood up, adjusted my dress, and walked out without saying a single word to him. Outside, the sun was bright, almost mocking the cold room I had just left. A black sedan was waiting for me. I got into the back seat and finally allowed myself to breathe. "Did everything go well, ma'am?" my driver asked gently. I nodded. Then I took out my tablet. On the screen appeared the login page of a private banking system, one my family had used for generations. I logged in using my fingerprint. A detailed financial map appeared, showing accounts, cards, permissions, and access levels. Ryan never knew the truth. He was never the owner. Every house we lived in, every car he drove, every credit card he bragged about, they were all connected to my family's account. He only had permission, and permission can be taken away. Calmly, I tapped the screen. Access revoked, cards blocked, transfers frozen. A green confirmation mark appeared. I leaned back in the seat and closed my eyes. At that exact moment, Ryan was probably already celebrating. He loved attention. He loved showing off. He believed confidence could solve everything. He had no idea what was coming. That same afternoon, Ryan burst out of the courthouse feeling lighter than ever. He called Vanessa, the woman he claimed was his true happiness. He laughed as he told her how easily he had won, how I walked away with nothing, how I didn't even fight. Silence, he believed, meant defeat. They immediately started planning a wedding. Not a simple one, a grand one. A wedding meant to prove something to the world. Ryan booked one of the most expensive hotels in the city. Crystal chandeliers, imported flowers, luxury at every corner. The total cost was $350,000. When his credit card declined, he laughed. When every card stopped working, he blamed the bank. He wrote a company check instead, confident as ever. The hotel accepted it. That night, Ryan slept peacefully, dreaming of applause and admiration. Vanessa dreamed of gowns, diamonds, and status. And me? I slept better than I had in years. Because I knew the party they were planning wasn't a celebration. It was a stage. I'll tell you what happened the moment Ryan tried to live the life he believed he owned, and how his perfect fantasy began to crack in front of everyone. If you want to hear what happens next, subscribe to Stories with Sister Mira and stay with me. That night, while Ryan slept like a victorious king, I stayed awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling. Not because I was anxious, but because my mind was finally quiet. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to fix anything. I didn't feel responsible for anyone else's mistakes. And that felt strange and freeing. Before I continue, let me remind you gently, if stories like this keep you listening, please subscribe to Stories with Sister Mira. These stories take courage to tell, and your support truly matters. And don't forget to comment where you're watching from. Now, let's continue. The next morning, Ryan woke up excited. He hummed to himself as he showered, already imagining the life he thought he had secured. He put on one of his expensive shirts, adjusted his watch, and glanced at himself in the mirror with satisfaction. He had no idea the mirror was about to become his enemy. Vanessa was waiting for him in the living room, scrolling through her phone, showing him pictures of wedding dresses that cost more than most people earn in a year. She spoke quickly, excitedly, listing things she wanted to buy that day: designer shoes, jewelry, imported wedding favors. Ryan smiled and nodded, even though something small but uncomfortable was beginning to stir inside his chest. The first stop was a luxury boutique in the most expensive shopping district in the city. The staff greeted them warmly, offering drinks and snacks, treating them like royalty. Vanessa walked around the store like she owned it, picking items without checking prices. "I'll take this and that one too," she said, smiling. Ryan sat quietly, pretending to be relaxed. When it was time to pay, he pulled out a platinum card, different from the one that failed the day before. The machine beeped. Declined. The smile on his face froze for half a second. The clerk tried again. Declined. Ryan laughed awkwardly. "It must be a security check," he said loudly. "Banks do this for high-profile clients." Vanessa frowned slightly, but said nothing. They left the store without buying anything. At the next boutique, the same thing happened. Then the next. Ryan's confidence began to crack. Sweat formed at his temples. He tried to open his banking app on his phone, but the screen displayed a short message that made his stomach drop. "Your account has been temporarily restricted. Please contact your branch." His heart started pounding. He lied. He told Vanessa there must be a system issue. He promised everything would be fixed by the afternoon. He blamed hackers, maintenance, anything except the truth. Vanessa didn't look convinced. To regain control, Ryan decided to do something big, something that would prove his power. He drove straight to a luxury car dealership
and picked out a deep red sports sedan as a wedding gift. Buying a car usually meant financing, he thought. No cards, no swiping. But when the salesman entered Ryan's information into the system, his expression changed. He excused himself, whispered to his manager, then returned with a stiff smile. "I'm sorry, sir," the manager said carefully. "Your application has been rejected." "Rejected?" Ryan snapped. "That's impossible." The manager lowered his voice. "Your name is currently flagged due to frozen assets and ownership disputes." The words hit Ryan like a slap. Vanessa stepped closer, confused. "What does that mean?" Ryan grabbed her hand and dragged her out of the dealership, furious and embarrassed. In the car, he screamed at his phone, calling his office, demanding answers. That was when the truth finally caught up to him. His finance manager explained carefully that Ryan's access had been removed. The bank had informed them that the majority shareholder had changed permissions. Ryan went silent. Majority shareholder. For the first time, it truly hit him. He had never owned anything. That same afternoon, an elegant envelope arrived at my office. It was an invitation. Ryan and Vanessa's wedding. Gold lettering, expensive paper, excessive design. I opened it calmly, scanned the details, and smiled faintly. Then I wrote one word on the RSVP card: attending. I wasn't going as a guest. I was going to end a lie. The day of the wedding arrived faster than anyone expected. The hall ballroom sparkled. Flowers filled every corner. Guests from high society arrived in luxury cars. Vanessa floated around in her wedding dress, glowing with pride. Ryan, on the other hand, was unraveling. Vendors kept calling him, payment reminders, threats, demands. His phone buzzed nonstop. He lied to everyone, saying the money was processing. He just needed the ceremony to start, just needed to survive the night. At exactly 8 o'clock, the host announced Ryan's speech. Applause filled the room. Ryan walked to the microphone, straightened his tie, and smiled. He talked about success, about building his career from nothing, about freedom, about finally finding the woman who understood his value. Vanessa beamed. And then everything stopped. The music cut off, the lights dimmed, the microphone died. Confusion spread through the room like a wave. The large doors at the back of the ballroom slowly opened. Every head turned. I walked calmly in, dressed in black, my heels echoing against the marble floor. Beside me was Mr. Calder, my father's old friend, and the man who truly controlled the company Ryan thought he was his. Guests whispered. Faces turned pale. Ryan's smile vanished. Vanessa shouted for security, but no one moved. We walked to the front table and sat down, as if we belonged there, because we did. Mr. Calder stood up. The lights came back on, but only on him. He held a microphone and spoke clearly. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding tonight." Behind him, the screen lit up, not with wedding photos, but with a company ownership chart. My name was at the top. Ryan's was not. The room erupted in gasps. Mr. Calder explained everything, calmly, precisely. He explained Ryan's position, his permissions, and his misuse of company funds. Then he revealed the clause Ryan had signed that morning, the indemnification clause. Ryan's legs gave out. $7 million. That was the debt. Police entered. Handcuffs clicked. Vanessa screamed. Ryan begged. I stood up, looked at him once, and spoke quietly. "This is the consequence of your choices." Then I turned and walked away. I'll tell you what happened after the arrest and how silence became my greatest victory.
The sound of the handcuffs echoed louder than any music ever had in that ballroom. It was sharp, final, and humiliating. Ryan's wrists trembled as the metal closed around them, his expensive suit now meaningless, his confidence completely stripped away. The man who once spoke like he owned the world couldn't even stand on his own feet anymore. Vanessa screamed his name, her voice cracking, makeup smeared down her face. She tried to reach him, but security stopped her. The guests, people who had laughed with him, praised him, envied him, now held up their phones, recording his fall without shame. No one rushed to help. No one defended him. That was the moment Ryan finally understood something he had ignored for years. Respect based on lies disappears the moment truth shows up. I watched quietly from where I stood. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel anger either. What I felt was emptiness, like a chapter had finally closed and the echo of it was fading away. Ryan saw me then. His eyes met mine, wide with panic, red from tears. He called my name, his voice hoarse, broken, desperate. He promised change. He blamed Vanessa. He blamed stress. He blamed everything except himself. "I still love you," he cried. "Please help me." For a brief moment, I remembered the man he used to be, or at least the man I thought he was. But that memory no longer had power over me. "I already helped you," I said softly, "for years." Then I turned away. The police let him out through a side door. His head hung low, shoulders slumped, the weight of reality finally crushing him. Vanessa collapsed into hysterics behind him, screaming at anyone who came close, her wedding dress dragging on the floor like a cruel joke. The ballroom emptied slowly after that. Conversations were hushed, faces were pale. What was meant to be a celebration had turned into a public reckoning. I walked out calmly, my heels steady, my posture straight. Outside, the night air felt cool and clean, as if the world itself had exhaled. The next morning, the story was everywhere. News headlines spoke of fraud, embezzlement, and a fallen executive. Photos of Ryan being escorted by police flooded social media. Vanessa's tear-streaked face became a symbol of misplaced ambition. People speculated, judged, mocked. I didn't read the comments. I had no interest in public opinion anymore. At the office, things moved quickly. Ryan's access had already been terminated. Accounts were audited, documents reviewed. Projects that had been bleeding money for years suddenly made sense once his mismanagement was uncovered. What shocked most people wasn't the debt, it was how much damage arrogance had caused. $7 million. That was the final figure. Failed investments, unauthorized expenses, personal luxuries disguised as business needs, everything carefully documented, everything traceable. Ryan's lawyer tried to negotiate, tried to delay, tried to soften the consequences, but contracts don't care about pride, and signatures don't forget. Meanwhile, Vanessa's world collapsed just as fast. Her name was on contracts she never bothered to read. Vendors demanded payment. The hotel refused to let her leave until statements were signed. The ring she loved so much was taken as evidence. She tried calling friends. No one answered. She tried calling family. They told her to fix her own mess. When you build relationships on status, they disappear the moment status does. Days passed, then weeks. Ryan sat in a small holding cell, stripped of everything that once defined him. No tailored suits, no assistants, no applause. Just concrete walls and silence. For the first time in his life, silence spoke louder than words. He replayed every moment, the insults, the arrogance, the assumptions. He finally realized that the woman he dismissed as just a housewife had been the foundation holding his life together. And when that foundation stepped away, the entire structure collapsed. As for me, life felt strangely light. I moved out of the house we once shared. I didn't take much, only what truly belonged to me. The rest was just furniture filled with memories I didn't need anymore. The company stabilized faster than anyone expected. Without Ryan's interference, decisions became clearer, teams worked more efficiently, profits slowly recovered. People looked at me differently now, not as someone's wife, but as the person in charge. Still, success didn't feel loud or dramatic. It felt quiet, grounded, real. One afternoon, I received a letter. It was from Ryan. Handwritten, messy, desperate. He apologized, again. He said prison had changed him. He said he finally understood. He asked for forgiveness. Not freedom, just forgiveness. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. Some apologies come too late. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it just means letting go. Vanessa's situation didn't improve either. Lawsuits followed her everywhere. The lifestyle she chased had vanished, leaving behind debt and isolation. She tried selling designer items online just to survive. Reality is cruel when it arrives uninvited. Months later, the court verdict came. Ryan was sentenced, assets seized, debts enforced. The man who once believed he owned everything now owned nothing, not even his own time. When I heard the news, I felt a brief sting of sadness, not for him, but for the years wasted believing love could survive disrespect. I closed that chapter quietly. No celebration, no revenge, just peace. I'll tell you how life truly changed after the noise faded, how rebuilding yourself feels when the past finally stops chasing you. After the verdict, life didn't suddenly become perfect. There was no dramatic sense of triumph, no applause waiting for me at the door. What followed instead was something quieter and far more unfamiliar. Normal days. For a long time, chaos had been my routine, fixing problems, smoothing conflicts, apologizing for things I didn't do. When all of that disappeared, the silence felt strange, almost uncomfortable. I would wake up some mornings expecting my phone to be full of messages asking me to solve something urgent, but the phone stayed quiet. At first, that scared me. I realized how deeply I had been conditioned to believe my value came from being useful to someone else, from saving someone, from holding things together no matter how much it cost me. Letting go of that identity was harder than walking away from the marriage itself. The company kept moving forward. Meetings were calmer, decisions were discussed instead of dictated. People who had once avoided speaking honestly now felt safe enough to share their thoughts. Slowly, the culture changed. And so did I. I started coming into the office earlier, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I listened more than I spoke. I learned details I had once trusted Ryan to handle, only to discover how many shortcuts he had taken. The deeper I looked, the clearer it became. He hadn't been powerful. He had been protected. Protected by my silence, protected by my patience, protected by the assumption that I would always clean up the mess quietly. Removing him from the picture didn't destroy the company, it saved it. Still, there were moments when the past reached for me. I'd pass a restaurant we used to visit or hear a song that played during our early years. Those memories didn't hurt the way they used to. They felt distant, like scenes from someone else's life. One evening, while sorting through old documents, I found a photo tucked inside a folder. It was from our first year of marriage. Ryan's arm around my shoulders, my smile genuine, unaware. I stared at it for a long time, not with regret, but with understanding. I wasn't foolish for loving him. I was human. And humans don't fall because they're weak. They fall because they believe. I placed the photo back, closed the folder, and moved on. Vanessa's name surfaced occasionally through legal updates.
Her lawsuits dragged on, her social circle vanished, and the life she'd chased slipped further away every month. There was no satisfaction in hearing about her struggles, just a quiet reminder of how dangerous it is to build your identity on someone else's illusion. Ryan, on the other hand, faded from my daily thoughts almost completely. Prison strips people down to who they really are. Without status, without money, without an audience, there's nowhere to hide. His letters became less frequent, shorter, less dramatic. Eventually, they stopped. That was when I knew it was truly over. One weekend, I visited a property my family had owned for years but never fully used. It was quiet, surrounded by trees, far from the city noise. I walked through the empty building slowly, imagining what it could become. A place for children. Not luxury, not image, just safety, structure, opportunity. The idea felt right in a way nothing else had for a long time. Within months, plans were drawn, renovations started, the building transformed into something warm and welcoming. Watching it come to life filled a part of me I didn't realize had been empty. Giving back wasn't about redemption, it was about alignment, about choosing where my energy would go next. At work, profits stabilized, investors regained trust. The board meetings were no longer battles of ego, they were conversations. Decisions were made with long-term impact in mind, not short-term image. People began to see me not as someone who reacted, but as someone who led. That shift didn't come from power, it came from clarity. One afternoon, after a long meeting, I stayed behind alone in the conference room. The city skyline glowed outside the window, steady and indifferent. I realized something important then. I didn't miss the life I lost. I missed the person I used to be before I started shrinking myself to fit someone else's insecurity. And that person was finally coming back. I began traveling again, not for business, but for myself. Quiet places, long walks, books instead of schedules, mornings without urgency. Freedom doesn't arrive loudly. It settles in gently when you stop fighting yourself. The house Ryan and I once shared was sold. I didn't walk through it one last time. I didn't need closure from a place that never truly felt like home. The proceeds went toward the community project and scholarships for children who had nothing to do with my past, but everything to do with the future. That felt like balance. One evening, standing on the terrace of the newly finished center, I watched children run across the grass, laughing freely. Their laughter was real, unfiltered, untouched by ambition or manipulation. I smiled without realizing it. For the first time, happiness didn't feel fragile, it felt earned. Yet, even then, I knew the story wasn't finished, because sometimes the most difficult part isn't surviving betrayal, it's learning who you are when the person who defined your role disappears. And the moment I finally understood what strength really looks like and how peace became the most powerful thing I owned. Strength doesn't arrive the way people imagine it does. It doesn't crash through the door wearing confidence or announce itself with loud decisions. Real strength comes quietly, almost unnoticed, slipping into your life the moment you stop trying to prove anything. That understanding came to me on an ordinary morning. I was standing in my kitchen, sunlight filtering through the window, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. There was no rush, no voice demanding attention, no tension pressing against my chest. Just silence. Gentle, unthreatening silence. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. For years, silence had meant conflict waiting to happen. It meant I was about to be blamed for something. It meant I needed to prepare myself. Now, silence meant peace. It meant choice. I realized then how much of my life had been shaped around someone else's instability. How many decisions I made not because they were right for me, but because they would keep things calm. I mistook endurance for loyalty and self-sacrifice for love. Looking back, I don't judge myself harshly for that. We do what we need to survive the version of life we're given. Work continued to evolve. The company had moved past crisis mode and into something steady. People smiled more in meetings. Ideas flowed instead of being shut down. Even disagreements felt healthy, constructive. I was no longer walking on invisible landmines. One afternoon, a young manager approached me after a meeting. She hesitated before speaking, her hands nervously clasped together. She told me she had almost quit a year earlier because she felt invisible. But now, she said, she finally felt heard. That moment stayed with me. It reminded me of how deeply leadership affects people, not through authority, but through safety. At the community center, things grew faster than expected. Children arrived with stories heavier than their small shoulders should carry. Some were angry, some were withdrawn, some didn't trust kindness at all. I recognized that look. It was the look of someone who learned too early that stability can disappear without warning. I spent time there quietly, listening more than speaking. Healing isn't something you force, it's something you allow. Slowly, the walls came down. Smiles appeared where there had been none. Laughter became louder, more frequent. Watching that transformation taught me something important. Pain doesn't disappear because time passes. It disappears because it's met with patience. Occasionally, memories of Ryan surfaced, not sharply, not painfully, but like old echoes. I no longer wondered what he was doing or how he felt. That chapter had been closed by his own choices, not mine. I had finally learned the difference between compassion and self-betrayal. One evening, I received a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in years, a mutual acquaintance. She apologized for believing Ryan's version of events, for assuming I was too quiet to be capable. I thanked her politely, but the apology didn't matter anymore. When you stop needing validation, other people's opinions lose their power. The biggest change, though, wasn't external, it was internal. I stopped explaining myself, stopped shrinking my words, stopped apologizing for having standards. I noticed it in small ways: how I walked into rooms, how I spoke during negotiations, how I said no without guilt. I wasn't harder, I wasn't colder, I was clearer. Clarity is often mistaken for cruelty by those who benefited from your confusion. There were days when grief still appeared unexpectedly, not grief for the marriage, but for the version of myself who believed love meant endurance without boundaries. I allowed that grief to exist without shame. Healing isn't linear. Some days you feel strong, other days you feel tender. Both are valid. Months passed, seasons changed, life settled into a rhythm that felt like it belonged to me for the first time. My decisions aligned with my values. My time felt like it was my own. And then, unexpectedly, something shifted again. During a routine legal meeting, my attorney mentioned Ryan's name casually. His case had progressed, appeals denied, finality approaching. I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no sadness, just neutrality. And that's when I understood something profound. Indifference isn't bitterness, it's freedom. The opposite of love isn't hate, it's release. That realization settled deep within me, anchoring something solid and unshakable. I had moved past survival, past recovery. I was living. But life has a way of testing lessons just when you think you've mastered them. Because not long after that meeting, I received an unexpected request, one that would force me to confront the past one last time, not with fear or anger, but with absolute honesty. And when the past tried to knock on my door again, and how I responded in a way I could never have before.
The request arrived on a quiet afternoon, the kind of afternoon that usually passes without leaving a mark. I was reviewing reports when my assistant hesitated at the door, holding an envelope instead of her tablet. That hesitation alone told me it wasn't routine. She placed the envelope on my desk carefully, as if it carried weight beyond paper. "It's marked urgent," she said softly. I nodded and waited until she left before opening it. The letter was brief, formal, legal. Ryan wanted to see me, not through lawyers, not through intermediaries. He requested a personal meeting before the final phase of his sentencing. The letter explained that this meeting would not affect legal outcomes. It was, in his words, a final request for closure. I sat back in my chair and stared at the wall. For a moment, memory stirred. Not vividly, not painfully, but enough to remind me that history doesn't disappear just because we move forward. It waits quietly, hoping for an opening. I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel anger. What surprised me most was that I didn't feel tempted either. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. For days, I didn't respond. Life continued as usual: meetings, phone calls, site visits to the community center. But somewhere in the background, the request lingered, not as a wound, but as a question. What does closure actually mean? People often assume closure comes from confrontation, from explanations, from apologies spoken out loud. But experience had taught me something different. Closure isn't something another person gives you. It's something you grant yourself. Still, I agreed to the meeting. Not for him, for me. The prison visitation room was exactly what you'd imagine. Cold lighting, hard chairs, a thin glass barrier separating two sides of a story that would never intersect again. When Ryan walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. The man who once commanded rooms now moved carefully, shoulders hunched, eyes dull. His confidence, the loud, performative kind, was gone. In its place stood someone smaller, older, worn down by consequences he never believed would reach him. He sat down slowly across from me. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he smiled weakly. "You look well." "I am," I replied. That seemed to catch him off guard. He had prepared for anger, for bitterness, maybe even for tears. Peace unsettled him more than any confrontation ever could. He began talking almost immediately, apologizing, explaining, rewriting the past with a desperation that bordered on panic. He spoke of regret, of loneliness, of realizing too late what he had lost. I listened without interrupting, not because I owed him that courtesy, but because I wanted to observe something: accountability, and I didn't see it. His words circled around responsibility without ever landing on it. His mistakes were always paired with excuses, stress, pressure, bad influences, everyone but himself. When he finished, he looked at me expectantly, as if forgiveness was a transaction, as if time served erased damage done. I leaned forward slightly and spoke calmly. "I didn't come here to punish you, and I didn't come here to save you." He frowned, confused. "I came because I wanted to see if you had truly understood what happened, and now I know." He asked me if I hated him. The question surprised me, not because it was unexpected, but because it was unnecessary. "No," I said honestly, "I don't hate you." That answer seemed to hurt him more than hatred ever could. "Hate would mean you still matter to me in that way. You don't." He went quiet. I told him I had forgiven him, not because he deserved it, but because I deserved peace. Forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation. It didn't mean forgetting. It simply meant I refused to carry the weight of resentment any longer. Then I stood up. "I hope you learned something from this, not so you can be someone else's problem, so you don't become your own again." He reached for the glass instinctively. I didn't. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. Walking out of that room felt different from walking out of the courthouse months earlier. That day, I felt relief. This time, I felt completion. The past no longer had access to me. In the weeks that followed, something shifted internally. A door closed quietly, without drama. I slept deeper, laughed easier, thought less about what had been and more about what could be. At work, long-term plans finally took shape: expansion strategies, ethical partnerships, initiatives that aligned with the values I had once set aside for convenience. The company was no longer just profitable, it was principled. At the community center, a young girl asked me one evening if people could really change.
I looked at her carefully before answering. Some do, I said, but the most important change is learning when not to wait for others to become who you need. She nodded, absorbing the words in her own way. That night, I understood something profound. My story was never about revenge. It was about reclamation, reclaiming my voice, my time, my boundaries, and most importantly, my self-respect. But just when life felt settled, another unexpected moment arrived, not from the past this time, but from the future. A choice that would challenge everything I believed about trust, vulnerability, and starting over. And the opportunity I never expected, and the decision that scared me more than betrayal ever did.
The opportunity arrived quietly, without drama or urgency. That was how I knew it was different. It came in the form of an invitation to collaborate on a long-term project, one that blended business, education, and community development. On paper, it was exactly the kind of work I had been moving toward: meaningful, sustainable, honest. But attached to the proposal was something unexpected: a name. Ethan Cole. We had met briefly months earlier during a regional development meeting. At the time, he was just another face in a crowded room, calm, observant, not interested in dominating the conversation. He spoke only when necessary, and when he did, people listened. I remembered that. Still, seeing his name now triggered something unfamiliar. Not fear, not excitement, caution. After everything I had been through, caution had become my instinct. I no longer rushed toward anything that asked for trust. I examined it, questioned it, sat with it. I agreed to a meeting, not because I felt ready, but because growth rarely waits for readiness. We met at a quiet cafe near the edge of the city, far from offices and formal settings. Ethan arrived early. He stood when I approached, not out of performance, but out of habit. That mattered more than he knew. The conversation flowed easily, not because we were similar, but because neither of us was trying to impress the other. He spoke about long-term impact, about patience in leadership, about systems that support people instead of exploiting them. He didn't ask about my past. He didn't reference Ryan. He didn't treat me like a story. He treated me like a person. And that unsettled me. After the meeting, I didn't feel butterflies or excitement. I felt something far more unfamiliar: calm curiosity. Over the next few weeks, we worked together closely. Emails turned into calls, calls turned into site visits. Decisions were made collaboratively, without ego or urgency. Ethan didn't rush me. He didn't test boundaries. He respected silence. That respect was both comforting and frightening, because when someone doesn't push, you're left alone with your own fears. I realized how deeply betrayal had shaped my reflexes, how quickly my mind searched for hidden motives, how often I prepared for disappointment before it ever arrived. Healing doesn't erase scars. It teaches you how to live with them. One evening, after a long day reviewing plans, Ethan asked a simple question: "Do you trust yourself again?" The question caught me off guard. I didn't answer immediately, because the truth was, I wasn't sure. I trusted my judgment professionally, I trusted my boundaries, but trusting myself emotionally felt like stepping onto unfamiliar ground. "I'm learning," I said finally. He nodded, accepting that answer without pressing. That acceptance mattered. Weeks passed, the project moved forward, results began to show. Communities responded positively, investors followed. Everything was working, smoothly, quietly, without chaos. And yet something inside me resisted labeling what was happening. I wasn't afraid of him, I was afraid of hope. Hope had once cost me years of my life. One evening, after a long meeting, we walked outside together. The city lights glowed softly, distant and non-intrusive. Ethan stopped and turned to me. "I want to be honest," he said, "not because I expect anything, but because honesty matters." I waited. "I admire how you lead, not the success, the way you carry responsibility, the way you don't seek control." He paused. "And I'm interested in you, not as a project, not as a chapter in my life, but as a person." The words were simple,
No grand declarations, no pressure, just truth. I felt my chest tighten, not with fear, but with awareness. This was the moment I had avoided imagining, the moment where choice returned. I thanked him for his honesty. I didn't give an answer. I went home and sat alone in silence, not the fearful silence of the past, but the reflective kind. I asked myself questions I had avoided for a long time. Was I protecting my peace or hiding behind it? Was independence a strength or a shield? Was I avoiding pain or avoiding life? The answers didn't come all at once, but something shifted. The next day, I told Ethan I needed time, not because I was unsure of him, but because I was still learning how to open doors without losing myself. He smiled gently. "Take all the time you need," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time in years, that promise didn't sound like a trap. It sounded like respect. That night, I realized something important. Starting over doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing differently, not from fear, but from clarity. Still, clarity doesn't guarantee certainty. And just when I thought I understood my own heart again, life presented one final test, one that would ask me to choose between the comfort of solitude and the courage of connection. And finally, I'll tell you how I made that choice and what true peace finally looked like when the story came full circle.
I didn't make the decision right away. For days, I lived normally. Meetings, phone calls, quiet dinners, early mornings. But beneath the routine, something gentle was unfolding. Not pressure, not urgency, just awareness. I realized that for a long time, I had confused peace with isolation. I thought safety meant standing alone, untouched, unreachable. And while solitude had helped me heal, it wasn't meant to become a permanent shelter. There's a difference between protecting your peace and imprisoning yourself inside it. That truth settled slowly, like dust after a storm. Ethan didn't call. He didn't message. He didn't check in to see where I stood. And that silence wasn't empty. It was respectful. He gave me space without disappearing, and that told me more about his character than any promise ever could. One afternoon, I found myself at the community center earlier than usual. The children were outside, running freely, their laughter echoing through the open space. I watched them for a long time. They trusted the world again, not because it had been kind to them, but because someone had taught them it could be. That's when it clicked. Healing doesn't mean closing your heart forever. It means learning who deserves access. That evening, I asked Ethan to meet me, not to give him an answer, but to speak honestly. We walked along a quiet path lined with trees, the kind of place where conversations feel lighter simply because the world isn't watching. "I'm not afraid of you," I told him. He listened without interrupting. "I'm afraid of losing myself again," I continued. "I worked hard to rebuild my boundaries. I won't compromise them for anyone." He nodded. "I wouldn't want you to," he said. I told him I wasn't looking for rescue, validation, or distraction. I wasn't interested in rushing towards something just because it felt safe or new. "I want a partnership," I said, "one where we choose each other without shrinking." He smiled, not triumphantly, not eagerly. "Then we want the same thing," he replied. That was it. No fireworks, no dramatic moment, just alignment. We didn't label anything that night. We didn't make promises about the future. We agreed to move forward intentionally at a pace that honored both our lives. And for the first time, that felt enough. Months passed. Life continued, steady, meaningful, full. Work expanded responsibly. The community projects grew. Children graduated. Scholarships were awarded. Real impact replaced symbolic gestures. Ethan became part of my life not as a centerpiece, but as a presence, supportive without control,
honest without demand, present without expectation. And slowly, trust rebuilt itself, not loudly, not all at once, but brick by brick. Occasionally, memories of Ryan surfaced, not as pain, but as contrast. I saw clearly now what love wasn't, what respect wasn't, what partnership wasn't. That clarity became my compass. One day, while organizing old digital files, I stumbled upon an album I had forgotten to delete, photos from my wedding years ago. I hesitated for a moment before opening it. I didn't feel anger, I didn't feel sadness. I felt gratitude. Gratitude that I had survived that chapter, gratitude that I had learned from it, gratitude that it no longer defined me. I deleted the album without ceremony. Some endings don't need witnesses. Ryan's story faded into the background of my life. News about his sentence, his appeals, his regrets no longer stirred anything inside me. He had become what he always feared, irrelevant. And that wasn't punishment, that was consequence. One evening, standing on the terrace of the community center, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized something quietly profound. I was happy. Not the loud, performative happiness Ryan once chased, not the fragile kind that depends on approval or image, but the deep, steady kind. The kind that doesn't panic when things go wrong, the kind that doesn't need to prove itself, the kind that stays. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who stayed silent to keep the peace, who believed endurance was love, who confused loyalty with self-erasure. I didn't judge her. I thanked her. She had survived so I could live. Now, when I walk into rooms, I don't announce myself. I don't need to. My presence carries weight because it's rooted in truth. I speak when necessary. I listen when it matters. I leave when respect is missing. And I no longer fear silence. Because silence is no longer where I disappear. It's where I choose myself. If there's one thing my story has taught me, it's this. Sometimes the strongest move isn't confrontation. It isn't revenge. It isn't even forgiveness. Sometimes the strongest move is walking away quietly and building a life so full, so grounded, and so honest that the past no longer recognizes you. My name is Mira, and this wasn't the end of my life. It was the moment it finally began. Thank you for listening to my story until the very end. If this story touched your heart, inspired you, or reminded you of your own strength, please subscribe to Stories with Mira. Your support helps me share more real-life stories like this, stories of resilience, truth, and quiet power. And before you go, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? I'd love to know, and I truly read every message. Until next time, take care of your heart and never underestimate the power of your silence.